The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 9th chapter. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such things?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord. His alibi was simple. He kept saying it over and over again, but it was like people weren't listening or they couldn't hear it. I went, I washed, now I see. It was all he knew, and for him, it was enough, but not for those around him. I mean, this blind man bumps into Jesus one day, and Jesus takes away his blindness, enabling him to see again, and in so doing, pretty much, at least for a time anyway, severely complicates his life. He becomes a scandal to the community, is abandoned by his parents, and eventually is kicked out of the synagogue. Well, the story begins as we meet this man, blind from birth, it says, sitting in his usual spot, and he's begging for handouts. Well, the disciples walk by along with Jesus, and they bring up a theological question about whether his blindness was caused by his own sin or by the sin of his parents. Stupid question, built on faulty premises. You see, the disciples see the blind man, and they're concerned about the theology of blindness. Jesus sees the blind man and is concerned about the blind man. We can talk about the causes of blindness, Jesus says in essence, or we can do what it is I was sent here to do. A little mud, a little water, and suddenly the blind man is no longer blind. And that's when the blind man's troubles really begin. I mean, imagine the man's life, the blind man's life. Suddenly his source of income is gone. No more begging for handouts, right? And there goes the disability checks. And now he's going to have to go and get a real job for the first time in his life. Well, you can see what I mean. In the meanwhile, he's got a few other hurdles to overcome. He returns home, and some of his neighbors refuse to acknowledge that he can really see. Others think he just looks like the blind man that they've known, but is really someone else. And furthermore, what they do is they drag him in front of those who should have known better, in front of the religious leaders. But the sabotage continues as they ask, "Tell us, Mr. Formerly Blind Man, how did you get your eyesight back?" Well, this guy, he made mud with his own spit, and he stuck it on my eyes. And then he told me to wash it off in the local pool. I went, I washed, now I see. The religious leaders respond, people who are blind from birth are paying for the sins of their family, and God doesn't use mud to heal people. And unknown self-appointed prophets like this Jesus fellow, well, they aren't to be trusted. And God definitely doesn't allow healing on the Sabbath. And then they try to force him to renounce Jesus by asking him to confirm that Jesus is anything but the Messiah, that in fact Jesus himself is a sinner. Well, what can the man possibly say? He wisely relies on ignorance, and he says, whether Jesus is a sinner or not, I can't tell you. Only one thing I know, I went, I washed, now I see. Armed with their superior education, their flawless theology, and the power of their religious position, the religious leaders desperately try to regain control by attacking the poor man with more questions. Is Jesus of the devil? Where is Jesus? What do you know about this, Jesus? And finally he says, I don't know. Dragged before his neighbors, his family, the Pharisees, the man blind from birth until now, is pummeled by all of them. His neighbors don't believe him. His parents are more concerned about their own skin than in supporting their son, and the Pharisees attack him. But he will not shut up. "What's the matter with you guys?" he asks. "You don't know who this Jesus is, and yet he opened my eyes. I mean, it makes me think he must be from God, because if he weren't, how could he have healed my blindness?" But the Pharisees are so enraged that it says they threw him out of the synagogue. Well, Jesus gets word of it. And Jesus goes and he finds the man with all the wrong answers, all the wrong explanations, all the wrong theology. And the point of it all is rather simple. Jesus heals him of his blindness, throwing his life into a tailspin. And yet the man born blind doesn't seem to mind, for all the inconvenience of Jesus' healing of his blindness has given way to faith. And suddenly all the hassles he's had to endure as a result of being able to see again, all of that fades into the beauty of this brand new relationship with Jesus. But here's the real point. Through it all, the blind man keeps saying the same thing over and over again. "I went, I washed, and now I see." With all the problems he now faces as a result of having his sight restored, he bears witness to his experience. It's a simple theology, the total sum of all that he knows. "I went, I washed, and now I see." It has become the mantra of his life, his own personal credo. Faith in God is always well suited to bear witness to the works of God, especially in dismal circumstances. And it is the church's job, the call of new faith communities like ours, to be able to speak to dismal circumstances. You see, that's exactly what we're engineered to do. It's why we were created in the first place. It's why our name is River of Hope. Our namesake speaks to our nature to be this unique voice in the Coachella Valley that calls people to the fullness of life, to be a light, especially in the midst of so much darkness, to be hope in the midst of our sometimes dismal circumstances. So let's recognize something. We're at a unique stage of our development. I mean, last year we reached our initial goals. For 3 years we stretched, we strove, and with the help of God, we succeeded in becoming a congregation of the Pacifica Synod and the ELCA. We became a legitimate legal institution as well, an incorporated nonprofit. We adopted a constitution. We elected a church council. We expanded staff and more. Look what we have accomplished. But what happens after you accomplish most or all of your goals? What happens then? Well, there's always more to do, right? I mean, committees to form, policies to create, procedures to set in place, and your leadership is busy doing all of that. Those are necessary nuts and bolts kinds of things. Before, our mission was to create a church. Even our intentions to grow were about that. But surely it had to be more, right? It had to be deeper than that, because there were plenty of churches in Palm Springs. Oh, there were a few Lutherans here that were worshiping elsewhere who were glad to finally have an ELCA presence in this community. But as a whole, Palm Springs was not desperate for one more church, and other denominations may not have been all that excited to have one more faith community competing for members. Now, I want to suggest to you that having reached some major goals, some major accomplishments in our development, that suddenly we are without a clear vision for the future. In a sense, we can't see it. We have become blind. Now, that's not criticism. That's just normal developmental stuff. In other words, having become what we set out originally to become, a real church, what now? Where do we go from here? What unimagined future is God holding out before us? What exciting adventure awaits? I don't know. Do you? Or have we gotten there? Did we already arrive? And now we'll just get bigger and better and become like many other churches that exist to drive the organization, the institutional church that seeks to grow primarily because they have an expanding budget that they need to support, or they simply exist for the sake of their own members, and church becomes nothing more than one big support group or a club of spiritual, but mostly social benefits for those who belong. It's time to regroup, to rethink, to reimagine, re-envision. We've had a few months rest. Is it time to kick this thing into high gear again? I believe God is saying, you've only scratched the surface. There's more I want you to see. There is new vision to embrace. And I believe too that if we do this work centered in joy and based on the excitement of our faith, that it won't simply burn us out and use us up, but that it will truly plug again into our passion as to why God used us to start a church in the first place. And by God's Spirit, our eyes, like the blind man's, will be open to new vistas of possibility, new ways to see light, and to bring that light to those who live in darkness, new ways to take the love of God that we experience here through word and sacrament and through one another and share it with those around us. Is the goal simply to become a bigger church, a more efficient church? Or is the goal to become a more effective church? I want to remind you of one thing. It was the thing that my mentor spoke to me on the day of my ordination. Timothy, he said, God does not call you to be successful. God calls you to be faithful. God does not call us as a faith community to be successful. God calls us to be faithful. It doesn't mean that we can't be successful. It just means that that shouldn't be our primary goal. The blind man from birth who could now see had a clearer self-understanding. I went, I washed, and now I see. It was his faith that bore witness to the works of God in his life, and it was his testimony that literally became his vision for the future, even in the midst of some pretty intense opposition. And that's where we begin. Our future will be built upon the individual and collective faith of those who gather here as we bear witness to one another, with one another, and beyond these walls of what God has done in your life and mine, of what God is doing even now. You are a river of hope. 4 years ago, you didn't even exist. You were just a tiny gleam in God's eye. Now you do. But we aren't done. We're really just getting started. It's like the muddiness of who we were and who we were becoming has given way to clarity. God is giving us sight. May we do what the blind man did, and that is to take what God has done for us, in us and through us, and proclaim it, bear witness to it. Will there be obstacles, opposition, resistance, difficulty along the way? Sure. Look at the blind man's experience. But even in dismal circumstance, he hung on to what he knew. I went, I washed, now I see. May we hang on to what we know and see where it takes us. Amen.